So, bonjour, je m'appelle Heitor. Je vais vous présenter ce petit travail que j'appelle Natural History Collections of the 21st Century, Small Mammals, Heritage, and Potentialities for Integrative Approach. So I'll change for English because I'm Brazilian and I can understand some French. If you have some questions in French, you can ask. I will try to get it, but I will do the presentation in English. So I am a master's student at the University of São Paulo, in São Paulo, Brazil. And I'm here because I'm a master intern at the ISEM, supervised by Pierre Pifar. And my advisors in Brazil are Alexandre Reis Pessequilo and Joyce Prado. They are curators of mammals both in São Paulo, Museum of Zoology of the University of São Paulo, and University of São Paulo in the countryside of São Paulo. So I will change the subject clearly from schools and mussels to talk about collections that I believe that for who works with small mammals, for probably at some point we get in touch with natural history collections. So just to get to some context, natural history collections have their origin in cabinets of curiosity. So cabinets of curiosity were a framework to show power at some point when who have power shows or presents biodiversity in a way to show that they pass to some places and they collect everything that they could, and they show how diverse and how rich things are. And anyways, from this point, and with the development of paleontology, comparative anatomy, and after evolutionary biology, we get to the point of knowing natural history collections as we know it nowadays, which the main goals is to try to sample and collect the maximum that we can to try to have a piece of the time and space of the biodiversity, or if you're not biodiversity, natural history collections can also present geological artifacts or other things. But here today I will talk about small mammals collections, and so I brought this picture to present just two pictures, just two images. So what we have nowadays, it's I liked a lot this concept of Miller and collaborators from 2020, that they say that natural history collections have majorly three axes. So first, and the classical ones, museums and archives are, so it will be, as we see in the photos, like specimens fixed in alcohol, or taxonomized specimens, or plants, etc. And all data associated with them, metadata, archives, and geographic location, and all. But also, now we have information that are available in physical database and digital repositories. So we have collections that are linked to different databases, and they needed to be also linked to physical specimens. And at the same point, we also have living collections that with the environmental crisis are very important. So for example, zoos that have genetical patrimony, or bacteria, virus, and fungus cultures, to or seed banks. All those are also living collections that are always also part from natural history collections on this century. So with this development and this evolution of the concept of natural history collections, sure, the complexity of how manage this all this type of data and the effort that we need to do always also increases, and increases as well the effort that the researchers and the natural history workers should have to manage all this biodiversity data. Going further, one thing that we are year by year mastering more is how to access data from a specimen that is already collected in the collection. So this is a concept of extended specimen, also discussed by Miller and collaborators in 2020, that they talk about the importance of explore the maximum that we can from the specimen and access data on different disciplines. So, for example, we can access continuous morphology, like classical morphology, linear measurements, photographs. Also, nowadays, it's becoming more and more used CT scans, 3D technologies to access 3D information about specimens, even dry specimens or skulls, or even specimens in liquid alcohol, for example. Also to access tissues, and from them that we can gather genomic data, for example, DNA or RNA to calculate gene expression, and etc. And for linked also with the specimens, field observations, data, locality, GPS, habitats, behavior, how they were collected. Anyways. Also, we can access symbiosis, parasites, microbes, and this is an area that is very developed now that we are facing pandemics, and we came with studies came light more now because of the pandemic, so we see more these types of studies, and also chemical and other types of data that we can extract. So this is a thing that we should have in mind when we plan the field trip, because always we need to maximize the use, how we will use this specimen. So speaking on using different disciplines to access the knowledge of biodiversity, I brought an example of my project for masters, which is to work on dactylomies. Dactylomies is the gumbo rats from the Amazon. They occur from this whole area colored in the map. And here I brought the example. Sorry, I don't have partial results yet. So I will just exemplify how it's possible to access different types of data to study biodiversity. In this case, in my case, I'm studying the integrative taxonomy of dactylomies. So I'm trying to access genetic data, morphological data, and ecological data from specimens from museums. So here in the map, each symbol represents a type of data. So I have vocalization data in the triangles. So they are majorly concentrated here because there was some studies in Peru and West Brazil. And I have also in the balls are samples from tissues of dactylomies of museums. So historical tissues retrieved from skins, and also fresh tissues recovered from liver and other organs, storage and collections. Also, I retrieved school measurements from linear measurements in specimens, and alcohol preserved species to access soft tissues and morphology traits, and the distribution data and other metadata that I'm using to access behavior and ecological patterns. So here's an example of one of the cabinets that I looked on Para. So we can see that from the photo that I showed first, and there is some variation, external variation with it's just two pictures and the variation that I can see externally of these animals. So other than that, when we talk about using the collections and the using of different disciplines and different approaches for access to biodiversity, with this evolution of how we access, we also expect that collections increase the knowledge of the heredity of small mammals, in this case, small mammals. So we did a study in Brazil also to evaluate how collections contribute to our knowledge about small mammals. So I will invite you to take a look in this article. So this is a work that I participate with my colleagues in Espírito Santo about two collections that are in the heart of the Atlantic forest in Brazil. And we report various improvements on small mammals knowledge just for the creation and the creation of these collections. So these collections were created in the 2000s for Yuri Leite and Leonora Pires Costa. Probably you've heard about them. And they were getting a position in the Federal University of Espírito Santo, the place that I am graduate. And at that time, they started this collection. And 20 years later, we came with this study to evaluate how was the impact of these collections. So this is a summary of the main constraining points of the main contributions of the collections. So the blue star in the map shows the location of the collection itself, the mammals collection of the university. And they have approximately 5,000 species in 2021, the time of this study. And as you can see in this heat map, so this heat map was generated by points of collected, and each point can represent more than one species collected. So what we can see is that it's a regional collection. So this is the state of the Espírito Santo. It's located in the south west of Brazil. And what we can see is that the regional collections, in this case, this collection, are mainly focused on sampling areas surrounding the collection, which is a trait that we don't see too much if we compare to museum and great museums or national museum collections. So in national museum collections, what we see majorly is spread collections depending on who was sampling. And in this case, we have a big effort to collect surrounding the collections, the location of the collections, and to collect in different areas of this regional locality. And for doing this, so this graph resumes this. Both collections are separated by tissue collections and mammals collections, but they are linked, so we can access both specimens and tissues. Majorly, what we have is small mammals diversity, so rodents and bats, marsupials, rodents again, bats again, and other mammals. So majorly focus on sampling small mammals. So what they have in 20 years, it's about 5,000 specimens and 149 species. And between them, in these 20 years, it was possible to add to the list of the state of Espírito Santo, the state of the collection, 42 new species of mammals. And between them, 25 were of bats, 15 of rodents, and 2 of marsupials. And what is interesting also is that from the initial list of the Espírito Santo, 31 species were listed for the state, but the species were out of state collections. In other words, if you see that there is some species that you can access, but there is no collection in this state, you need to access from other museums. You need to go, for example, to American Museum to access our own biodiversity. In this case, we add 25 species from this list in this location. So now we could access species in locus. So this is very important. I will show after why. And also here in the side there is a tendency of collection that from the starting of the collection to the end, and we can see there is some trading points that have more field works and more collections, and this is majorly because of founding. So these symbols represent projects that were founding to strictly fieldwork and strictly collections, and after that there is a trend to decreasing fieldworks and collections. So why this is important, and this number? Majorly because they were responsible to formation of professionals, students, publications, scientific dissemination, and collaboration between institutions. Even the ISEM already received some material from there, and it helps to form to information of students, including myself. So this trend that we observed in decreasing of collections, it's a trend that is discussed for other authors that we are facing in various museums. So this is there is lots of reasons to this happens, but there is a trend that as the environmental crisis grows, the collections tend to decrease. And what we are seeing is that even though there is funding raising after the crisis, the environmental crisis, for example, the pandemics, collections that don't have more space or don't have more people to work, and so there is this constraining point that after you collect too much, you don't have more how to manage all these species. And speaking on Brazil scenery, I would invite you to the article. This was a group of the Brazilian Society of Mammalogists. They have a committee to create a database of the collections of Brazil. So in this article, there is contacts for all the collections in Brazil. They listed in 2021. So it's very useful if you want to access Brazilian specimens. There is names and responsibles for all of them with the supplementary material. And it was coordinated by Elisandra Almeida Chiquito, a very good friend, and my advisor, Alexandre. And so it's a very good panorama of what we have about collections in Brazil. So in the summary, Brazilian collections have grown mainly after the 70s exponentially, and in the 2010s they stopped to grow. So this is a accumulatory curve of the collections that were created. So in the end, we have approximately 71 collections, mammals collections in Brazil. So here I'm talking about mammals collections. And what we see is that there is a bigger concentration in southeast of Brazil, mainly because it's the region that have more universities. So in Brazil, what we often see is the collections are linked to universities. It's not too common to have museums as institutions, independent institutions. So in these regions, there's more collections, and also there's more specimens in collections. And to finish, I'm finishing already, but to finish, I would like to provocate a little bit more about the challenges that we face in Brazil about collections. So I'm here to talk about 21st century collections, but actually what we are facing in Brazil, it's not that a beautiful scene of CT scans and lots of cameras and lots of things happening. What we are facing, it's difficulty in accessibility, majorly because of constraining laws and constraining protective laws of biodiversity. And there is some papers trying to discuss this and how to mitigate these protective laws to access biodiversity more easily. And because this is mainly a thing that affects researchers in a way. They create for all uses of biodiversity, but researchers have more difficulty to access and to really share the knowledge of biodiversity. So if you're trying to work on Brazilian biodiversity, probably you need to face a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of papers, to sign. Myself, to work with Dutch here in France, I spent almost 3 months just with papers and trying to get permits to import samples. And so this is a scheme that Miller and collaborators showed like essential or ideal scheme. But when we came here to access these specimens by scientists, even though if you are a collaborator, if you are not a Brazilian, you have lots of trouble to access and even to understand our law. And also what we are facing every year, it's destruction of patrimony that is not repairable. So you probably listen about the firing in the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. It was a very huge and famous event in 2018, but we are facing these events every year in this scale. So there was a big fire in 2010 in the Butantan Institute that we lost almost 20,000 species of snakes and other viverrids and arachnids that they collected. There was this firing in Belo Horizonte last year. This year we have a fire in the University of the state of São Paulo, in the countryside of São Paulo. So it is the 21st century, and we are all using natural history collections. Maybe a lot of you are working in natural history collections or collaborating with Brazil in a way, but we are still facing old problems and anyways. So just not to be so sad about it and end in this way, there is this scheme also in Miller and collaborators in 2020 that talks about different ways to increase or to help natural history collections to ameliorate in a way. So in the lines, in the colored lines, there is the actors that do the actions. So natural history collections have a role, researchers, educators, universities, reviewers, and database management. And it involves a lot of different scales that you can contribute, even with grant writing or engaging communities or budget operations, engages citizen scientists to collect data, because we need also to collect data, but also we need to communicate clear guidelines for curating specimens and to archive field notes, sample design, collecting protocols, plan strategically, control and collection growth and management to not happen what we are seeing. And I will let you with this reflection. We can discuss a little bit after if you want. But we have something beyond that. It's in our hands of to try to conserve this patrimony that is so important as our forests, because they have time, space, uniqueness, and that this is my statement for today. Thank you. Any question?